Go to overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/online therapy to get 20% off your first month of cognitive behavioural therapy, with weekly sessions online with a therapist, in addition to worksheets, a journal, meditation and yoga videos, and unlimited messaging. There's strong evidence that CBT can help people who hoard, and accessing therapy online can be affordable and accessible. Find out more and get your discount at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/online therapy.
Here's a cool fact. A crocodile can't stick out its tongue. Another cool fact, you can get short-term health insurance for a month or just under a year in some states. United Healthcare short-term insurance plans are designed for people who are between jobs, coming off their parents' plan, or turning a side hustle into a full-time gig. Underwritten by Golden Rule Insurance Company, they offer flexible, budget-friendly coverage with access to a nationwide network of doctors and hospitals. Get more cool facts about United Healthcare short-term plans at uh1.com. Normally, being a little extra can be a bit much, but when it comes to healthcare, it pays to be extra. And United Healthcare makes it easy with Health Protector Guard fixed indemnity insurance plans. Underwritten by Golden Rule Insurance Company, they supplement your primary plan, helping you manage out-of-pocket costs without the usual requirements and restrictions like deductibles and enrollment periods. So when it comes to covering your medical bills, you can feel good about being a little extra. Visit uh1.com to find the Health Protector Guard plan for you.
Hey there, it's Michelle Norris. I'm host of a podcast called Your Mama's Kitchen. When I travel, I'm usually looking for a way to find a taste of home when I'm not at home. And one of the things I love to do when I am at home is entertain. And Airbnb allows me to do that. When I was in California recently, I rented a house that had a great kitchen. And when we were sitting around the table, we were all thinking, we're in someone else's house. Someone could be in all of our homes as well. If you have a home, but you're not always at home, you have an Airbnb. Your home might be worth more than you think. Find out how much at airbnb.com/host.
Welcome to the Overcome Compulsive Hoarding with That Hoarder podcast. I am drowning in stuff and trying to find a way out. Listen as I explore the issues and delve deep as somebody profoundly affected by hoarding disorder. Find out more, including links to subscribe to the podcast, at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk, and follow me on Twitter at ThatHoarder and on Facebook at facebook.com/ThatHoarder. So today I'm talking with Elizabeth Nelson. Elizabeth has a perspective on hoarding that I have no experience of, so I was really keen to have this conversation. Elizabeth, as a child, grew up in a hoarded home, and as my parents were not hoarders, nor do I have children myself, I thought that this experience was really worth discussing on this podcast. So Elizabeth, tell me a bit about why we're talking today. What makes hoarding an important topic to you?
Well, so I should confess how old I am, because I think that's really relevant to this discussion. So I'm 47. So if you think about the kind of attention that is now in the public about hoarding, how long has that existed? 10 years?
At most, yeah.
Right. So not very long. And so for me as a child in the environment and looking around, it was just incredibly confusing. So that's a big reason why this is an important topic for me to talk about, even though I don't live in that environment anymore. A lot of the experiences of families, when they see parents age and there's sort of this transition of the parent is no longer really caregiving the child is looking at solutions and figuring out how to help their parents age safely. And that, if you can imagine having that kind of social expectation imposed on you when your parents are living in an environment that is so out of control, So there are really sort of two sides of this issue. There's the experience of being a child, which I presume is very different now, because children growing up in this environment now probably have a slightly better understanding of what they're experiencing than I did. But for adults who are my age, we have this sort of second experience of confusion and not really fitting with the norm, right? People have conversations about their elderly parents like, I go over once a week and mow their lawn. Somebody who's in my position, that conversation looks very different. Like, I'm afraid that my mother's house will burn down because there are so many newspapers in it. And it's not a funny thing at all, but it's somewhat isolating. And I think it's a different kind of isolating. Hoarding disorder has such a stigma for almost everybody who's impacted by it.
Absolutely. So how old were you when you realized that the way you lived was different to the way most other people lived?
I think that for most children of hoarders, there is an awareness. Sort of like the person who's experiencing the disorder, like there's probably an awareness in the back of your mind, like, because you go to other people's houses and you see that it's different. I happen to have a close friend in my childhood whose home was very cluttered, but it wasn't to the level of dysfunction, primarily because periodically the whole family would just say, this is cleanup day, and they would all collaborate and work together in a way that was not possible in my own home. Because obviously somebody who's coping with the anxiety of this, like, it's the collaboration and letting people in to help is the sticking point. At least is what has been my experience. And so I think that I was probably about 11 when I realized that this was something to be embarrassed about. There was the neighbor whose house was cluttered like mine, but not due to dysfunction. We gave her a key to the house to feed the cat. And I wasn't embarrassed about that because it felt like we were living in similar homes. I didn't yet understand that it was abnormal to have somebody over your shoulder saying, you aren't allowed to throw away your own things. Like, at the level of control that was exerted in my house was the part that was dysfunctional. Anyway, my friend, the neighbor who was maybe 10 years old, she brought another child from the neighborhood into our house to help feed the cats when we were on vacation. And it was when we came home that my friend told me, like, oh, I brought Rachel in, and she was shocked. And then that was when I had this realization, like, okay, this is something that I really should be embarrassed about, and I don't want people to see this.
Sure. And this is a big question, but how would you say that growing up in that environment as a child affected you?
I think it really delayed a lot of some of the development that happens in a more functional household. Like, for instance, I think that in a normal household, children, as they get older, learn to take responsibility for their own personal spaces, and they are probably a little less anxious about making decisions for their own well-being. I think that in my house, I didn't have a space that was my own, and there's something weird about that. And I think that's hard. And I think that a lot of my mother's anxiety around the stuff and living in an environment with somebody who had all the anxiety attached to that stuff was hard. I couldn't make a decision about where to put my own things because it tended to be triggering for her. And so it took me a little longer as an adult to sort of swallow the idea of, like, I have a right to, like, asserting myself or, like, taking control of certain aspects of my life, because I was sort of in the habit of walking on eggshells and expecting to be criticized for a lot of things that I think normally older children are empowered to take control of certain aspects of their life. So for me, it was a lot of understanding my own autonomy in a way that I, like, wasn't allowed as a child.
Yeah, that makes sense. When we were talking by email, You said that being the child of a hoarder was a pretty unique situation, which I would agree with, but also that it was different even from being, say, a relative of a hoarder or a partner of a hoarder. Mm-hmm. Could you talk about that a bit?
Sure. So when I first decided that there was clearly a level of dysfunction that required intervention, this was about 15 years ago, I guess. Or a little over. I happen to live in a university town, and so I went to university libraries and I was researching until I figured out what it was, basically. And at that point, 15 years ago, there were support groups online, but they weren't as specific as, child of a hoarder. There was a group that I found that was like friends of hoarders, and it was like every relationship under the sun. And, I think I really discovered what the difference was, what was special about experiencing this in childhood and seeing it in a parent. When I tried to interact in a group that included all these different relationships. And so some of the feedback that I got was things like, my mother is just obsessively sending me packages of things that I do not want. And it's upsetting because I feel like I'm being confronted so frequently with symptoms of her illness and reminders of just what she's living. And it's frustrating because, people who have lived my experience understand that. Other people were responding to me why are you so ungrateful? Why is this a problem for you? This is a ridiculous thing for you to be complaining about. And I have to say that in my interactions with that group, when I would see messages and complaints from spouses, I lacked sympathy for that, because all I can think is this situation was foisted on me. You signed up for it. That doesn't make any sense to me. And so, I think it's really important to understand there are aspects of this relationship that are obviously beyond our control, right? We can't control the family that we were born into. So that's a difference. There's a joke that I've heard about, parents can push your buttons because they installed them. So there's that piece of it too, that is different. I've had a close, relationship with somebody who was the sibling of a hoarder. And I realized that there was a lot that we had in common in terms of the sense of responsibility. But there's a little different wrinkle to that, because I don't know that it's assumed that you have to care for a sibling, but there's a real assumption with the parent-child bond that your parents have given you the first 18 years of your life, and there's sort of a payback. And so I feel like the social pressure on children of hoarders is a little different. It's a little siblings may be estranged, and that people, that's too bad. But when you're estranged from a parent, I think there's just many, many layers of questioning about how could you do that? How could you abandon them? They gave you life. I think the pressure is just very different. And I think it's hard when anyone feels social pressure or internal pressure to care for somebody who is struggling with a disorder that really is, I often say it's beyond my skill set. I'm not a professional, and there's a whole lot of baggage that I bring to the situation. Even if I was the most skilled expert on compulsive hoarding, I probably wouldn't be the appropriate person to be intervening with my mother, because of the intimacy and all the emotional baggage between us. So yeah, it's just really complicated.
Absolutely. The thing you said about getting packages from her, I've had to really stop myself from helpfully giving my friends stuff. I'm getting rid of this, but you might want it, you might need it, you might appreciate it. And it was when I gave a bag of stuff to a friend that I said something like, oh, feel free to get rid of it if you don't want it. And then I thought, I'm just putting it on her now. I'm just giving her my crap. And it's not thoughtful. It's just shifting it from one person to another. And that's not good. I don't do that anymore. Because
I appreciate that you got that insight. That's wonderful. You should be proud of that.
Thank you. It's hard because, as you will know all too well, this sense that things have to be used and appreciated and not wasted. You can't just throw something away, but actually you can. And similarly, we have charity shops here. I believe they're called like Goodwill or something in America. I have to be careful what I give to charity shops as well, because they want good things to sell. They don't want crap. You don't want to just move your crap into their storeroom, because they then have to get rid of it. And so my instinct is to take perfect care of every item, and that can involve giving it to somebody else or to somewhere else. But I have to go against that, because not every little piece of something is worth saving. And I do know that. It's one of those things where I know it logically, but it's hard to apply sometimes. But it's it is something it took me a long time to realize, I would say.
Well, I just want to commend you, because I think that's wonderful. It's really important. And I don't like to make general statements, so I always try to be really clear that this is what I've seen in my mother, and I've heard other people also experience this aspect to it. The idea of wanting something to go to the better use or the best use, I'm actually less troubled by the idea of you sharing it with somebody and saying, like, if you don't want it, that's okay. That's actually feels to me like huge progress, because what would happen with my mother is she would need constant reassurance that I was using everything. And are you using that? Where is that thing that I gave you? And so there was this the tentacles of control were extending so far beyond the giving of the thing.
Yeah.
And to your point about charity shops, this is so interesting. I actually volunteer at a charity shop in the United States. And my sister jokes that it's like if our parents were alcoholics and I was a bartender. It is kind of funny. I don't know what's going on in the UK now, but what I often reassure people about our shop, because we do get donation. I'm in the donation door. And so we get visits from people who are clearly tackling a situation. Like, I can see from the look of their card that they're tackling a situation that is probably a problem. And, I reassure them actually that we have found outlets for recycling. If you donate a pair of trousers that has like holes and stains and is totally unwearable, we direct that to textile recycling, and it's like ripped apart and used to make something. We get paid by the pound for this recycling. And so there's very little actually going in the dumpster at the shop that I volunteer at. It would be interesting to learn what's happening in the UK if they have similar outlets, because we are very focused on a lack of waste. I mean, it's environmentally responsible, and that's another challenge, right? You can throw away things, of course you can, but the idea of saving and finding the best use, you can find a lot of validation for that kind of thinking, just in terms of like, the landfill, and so you have a lot of cues, like socially, that are sort of promoting the behavior that you're trying to fight. It's really hard. Definitely.
I mean, I can't disagree with any of that. It's absolutely true.
I also realize that, this challenge, like anxiety attached to stuff, it's similar to an eating disorder insofar as you can't just stop altogether. It's constantly on your mind. You're constantly presented with like, do I want this or do I not want this, or do I throw it away or do I not throw it away? So it really is a problem that you cannot escape. Like, those decisions face you every single day.
Yes, you still have to go into shops, and you still have to, it's, you can't never consume anything again. Consume, buy, acquire, whatever. So you have to moderate it and do it to a small degree. Whereas if you have a problem with alcohol, not ever drinking again tends to be the best way to approach it. How much insight do you think, was it just your mother at home, or did you have a father as well at home?
Yeah. So in my situation, my mother was hoarding and my father was confused by it. And in the last 10 years of his life, I was able to share information with him and educate him about it. And I mean, to his credit, he had lived through 50 years of real big challenges, not understanding what was wrong. And he had sort of traditional ideas about gender roles, in addition to the validation that his own mother was, my grandmother on his side was, like an interior decorator. So she very much controlled the household and ran the household very well and took pride in it. And so my father was trying to project that onto my mother, like I shouldn't intervene. I'm like, this is not my venue, like this, and so all of her control issues around hoarding of like, don't touch that, I'm handling that. That was kind of consistent with the way my dad grew up, and yet it was total super functional in his childhood and totally dysfunctional in his married life. And so, yeah. And so a lot of my intervention actually in the hoarding was prompted by my dad's situation, because he was very vulnerable. He became more physically disabled. And I have 3 older siblings. And so the way our family's coping with this situation was just a big challenge, because we had things that were in the best interest of my father were very upsetting to my mother. And my siblings and I all had slightly different relationships with both of these parents. And yeah, it's a lot. It's a challenge sometimes for family members to get on the same page in terms of how to approach this issue. Like, how do you intervene? Do you not intervene? Like, there are a lot of different ways that people can be made vulnerable in this situation without having caused the problem themselves. And so you're wrestling with all kinds of issues.
And how much insight did your mother have into her hoarding, would you say?
Probably variable. We tried to approach it thoughtfully with her. We tried to connect her with a therapist. One of the things that she said to me that I thought was the most revealing, at one point we were arguing about the fact that this house was unsafe for my father, and we had to approach a solution one way or the other. And we wanted to support her in all the appropriate ways to find the best solution. At one point she just blurted out to me, "I'm too old to change." And so basically she could go so far as acknowledging that it was a problem, but she could not accept the imperative that she alter the behavior. We probably had a couple of years of really big challenges. And then once my father passed, she's alone in a 5-bedroom house, and no one can tell her not to live there. She's not endangering anyone but herself. And so she's captain of the ship. So.
Yeah, it's immensely difficult. I know I had a period of, I want this to change, but there is nothing I am willing to get rid of to make that happen. Every item was vital. And so I want things to change, but I'm not willing to do a thing about it. I was so stuck on getting caught up in it all. What happened if you tried to throw things out when you were a child? Say your own rubbish or just something you didn't want or need anymore?
She would pick through it. And I remember one time I cleaned my room and she picked through what I had thrown away, and she found like 3 pennies. And she said, "You're throwing away money." And she talked about that for years after, that I was throwing away money. That's one of the things that's really frustrating as a memory. And it's something that I'm really working on in my own personal life, because there's a part, I have my mother's voice in my head of like, if the garbage includes stuff that might be important, I'm like wanting to double check, and I have to remind myself, like, no, like the people in my house, if they make a mistake, I have to have some level of trust. So, And truly, like, if you think about it, like that memory of my mom, I was maybe 10 years old. And, I think about my kids when they were 10, they're older than 10 now, but when they were 10, I can't imagine making a big deal about them throwing away pennies. Certainly not to the extent that my mother did. Like, if I had a conversation with them about like that, it would be like, oh, well, you threw away these pennies. Don't throw those away. But like for my mother, it was sort of like, this is evidence that you don't know how to clean your own room. You don't know how to sort rubbish. You're incompetent at this task. And I think that's a pretty strong theme when you're a child living with somebody with this kind of anxiety, is just this constant reiteration that you're doing it wrong. Your judgment isn't valid. You've made mistakes and like, I don't trust you. It's not good. Those are not the messages that children should be getting. Yeah,
so it's undermining your judgment. And also, it's very intrusive. I mean, maybe at 12 you've thrown away a used tampon, or maybe at 16 you've thrown away a pregnancy test. And those things should just secretly go into the trash with nobody ever knowing about them. It's intrusive.
That's a good word. And I think that's another theme, growing up with somebody that has this kind of anxiety attached to stuff. There's a lack of boundaries. I was probably involved in support groups online, specifically for children of hoarders. So we really had a lot of common experience, and there was a lot I could share and know immediately that, 5 people were going to say, that happened to me too, that happened to me too. But I was probably in that support group for a couple of years before I admitted the thing that I thought was like the super weirdest of all, which was that at a certain point in my childhood, I think I was 11 or 12, my mother just decided that she was going to move into my bedroom. Like, she was not interested in sharing a bedroom with my father anymore. And she thought it was completely reasonable. I had 2 twin beds in my room. She just started sleeping in my room. It's super weird. And it was during the years of my adolescence, when from the time I was like 10 or 11 until I was like 15, when she took over another bedroom in the house that one of my siblings had moved out of. That's just super weird. And I understand that there are some cultures where if you have a very small space, people share a room and family members are in tight quarters, and that is explained by, this is the space that we have. But the idea that I shared a bedroom with my mother in a 5-bedroom house, that's super weird, right? And it was her lack of respect for boundaries and understanding, like, this is my 14-year-old daughter. Like, she should have her own space. If she can have her own, like, I shouldn't be invading that space. There wasn't a sense of that. And anyway, when I did share that, I found out that had happened to other people too. And it was, they were similarly embarrassed about it, because it was just this sort of, it was weird.
It's an age where you really need privacy, isn't it? It's an age where you're going into adolescence, and it's confusing and weird already. You need time and space of your own to explore that, if that's possible. Like you say, some people live in a 2-bedroom flat with, a family of 6, and that can't happen. But when it can happen, it seems really wrong to intrude in that way.
Yeah, and I think it's sort of a symptom of a lot of other issues. I think it's safe to say that quite a lot of people who've grown up in this environment feel that level of control. Like, the environment looks chaotic, but one of the things that I used to share with people is, I would share pictures of my childhood home, and it looks like chaos, right? And I would tell people, this looks like the kind of place that you could just walk in and kick your shoes off and drop your backpack and just leave things around because of how chaotic everything looks. But the actual opposite is true. In my house and in a lot of houses like mine, if I came in and kicked my shoes off and dropped my backpack among all of her piles, I would then be told, like, look how messy you are. You've left your shoes and your backpack there. I mean, and for me, and I think for many others, like, the way I think about this is that the perfectionism is really strong in my mother. She achieved from an early age. She was success upon success upon success. She was a musical prodigy, so she was constantly praised for that. She was valedictorian of her class. Like, the perfectionism is a big, big thing that has led to a lot of success for my mother in her early life. And so I think it was for many years, it was probably inconceivable to her looking around her house and owning that and being like, I made this. Like, this is me. Like, I think she was frankly in a whole lot of denial. She was coming up with explanations to make her feel better about herself. Like, I'm a mom. I have these kids. These kids are messy. I understand how that works. I think that everyone in the world has parts of their lives that they can't quite reconcile, and they have an excuse and an explanation that sort of makes it easier for them to live with that. And it's that much harder when you're a little kid, and some of that dynamic is like foisting blame on you.
If you thought the only way to get a more defined jawline with natural-looking results was through surgery, think again. Juvederm Volux XC is a non-surgical injectable gel filler that improves moderate to severe loss of jawline definition and can help you achieve natural-looking results with little downtime. Even better, this improved definition lasts up to 1 year with optimal treatment. No maintenance required. Improve jawline definition for a smooth, sculpted look with Juvederm Volux XC. For important safety information and to find a licensed specialist, visit Juvederm.com. That's JUVEDERM.com. Not for people with severe allergic reactions, allergies to lidocaine, or the proteins used in Juvederm. Common side effects include injection site redness, swelling, pain, tenderness, firmness, lumps, bumps, bruising, discoloration, or itching. There's a risk of unintentional injection into a blood vessel, which can cause vision abnormalities, blindness, stroke, temporary scabs, or scarring. Talk to a licensed specialist to find out if it's right for you.
Think of all the sleep hacks you've ever heard. You could spend years trying them all, or you could instantly transform your sleep with Boll and Branch. They make the softest, most breathable bedding you'll ever feel. And it's all 20% off. That's their best sale of the entire season. Millions of sleepers love their buttery soft sheets, airy blankets, cloud-like duvets, and so much more. And you can try all of them for 20% off with promo code BUTTERY20. So hurry to bollandbranch.com today. That's BOLL and branch.com. See site for details.
Something I talk about on this podcast a lot is shame. There's a lot of stigma around hoarding, and a lot of us feel a lot of shame. And I'm interested in whether you, as the child of a hoarder, felt shame, and whether you still, if you did feel shame previously as a child, whether you still feel shame around that now.
I definitely felt shame as a child. I think it's been a different path for me, and this goes back to the different experiences of siblings. I know that in the early days of our support group online, we connected some dots and realized that there were a lot of parallels between children who grew up in alcoholic homes and how they've sort of played different roles. My sister often says that I couldn't do anything right as a kid, like that just everything I did was wrong. And so if I was going to survive that environment with any sort of self-esteem, I quickly became a bit of a rebel. And so I was pushing back on a lot of my mother's finger wagging and blaming and sort of trying to tell me all the things I was doing wrong. And so I think it was a little bit, I had in some ways a smoother path to adulthood and overcoming that shame, because I had to convince myself, like, no, I don't do everything wrong. Like, these are things that I'm doing right. And so I was actively seeking validation from places other than my mother. I think my sister, it was a little bit harder because she was put on a pedestal, and my mother showered her with praise and held her up as like the example of doing everything right. And so for my sister, it was a little harder to understand that my mother's view of things was her own dynamics of sort of dysfunction, because some of her positive feelings about herself were connected to the validation that she had gotten from our mother. I think there's shame built into this because our family of origin is such a part of our identity, right? So there was a part of me that was embarrassed that I had the person who contributed 50% of my DNA was so troubled and so challenged with this. It has been reassuring to me, or it's been gratifying to me a little bit to be able to talk about this publicly, because I feel like in a way I am drawing the line in the sand and saying, like, this is who she is. It is not who I am. These are challenges that she has and is not able to overcome. These challenges had an impact on me, but I'm overcoming them and I am understanding them better. It's very hard.
Absolutely. It's so complex, and as if parent-child relationships aren't complex already, adding this very visible dysfunction to a home really adds layers to it. I have been doing some reading just, to prepare for this conversation about the experience of being a child of hoarders, and something that I kept reading that broke my heart, to be honest, is that some people felt their parents valued their stuff and their trash more than they valued their children. Is that something you can relate to?
Oh, definitely. Definitely. I mean, if not, I've heard of really explicit situations where it looks that way, like the filth that is created in a bedroom, despite all complaints that, I don't want the cat litter box in my room. It's pretty explicit at that point that the hoarding parent is just simply ignoring the needs of the child. I think that for me, I probably have fewer specific examples to point to where I said, Mom, I really need this to be better. Like, I'm asking you, for my welfare to make this better. I can't think of situations like that, but it's very subconscious. It's like, it's all around you, right? Yeah, it's all around you. I mean, every time I had a play date at somebody else's house, or I was going to a sleepover at somebody's house, or going to a birthday party, I certainly had awareness that, this is something that can't happen in my house, because if I were to bring it up or suggest it, the answer would be oh, the house is impossible. There's no way. All through my childhood, I was visiting homes where it was clear that the parents had taken the time and effort to make that home possible to receive guests. And so it's hard to not think that way. Yeah, for sure. I would imagine that if you grow up in a hoarded home, you might have a tendency to slip into those patterns yourself, or kind of almost the opposite. You might have a tendency to have a super organized, everything is absolutely in its place and nothing is there that doesn't belong there. Do you find either of those, or of things you do? Definitely. Yeah, I do not slip on the reverse side. I'm definitely struggling, and I mentioned earlier about trusting other people in the household and allowing independent decisions about the stuff to happen without my involvement. I'm constantly wrestling with that, and I'm very lucky. I feel like I have a spouse whose tendencies are very compatible with my particular challenges. So he will say, I'm sick of it. I'm just going to clear it out, and I'm going to clear the basement. And what my job at that point is to hold back and just let it happen. Right. I remember one time he was clearing my husband cleared the basement, and I peeked in the garbage can and I saw a toy that had been our kids, and it was missing a couple pieces, but it was a wagon with wheels, and it was otherwise in reasonably good shape. And I was there was a part of me was I so want to fish that out and donate it, not keep it, just donate it. And then I was you know what? It's for the greater good. It's the more considerate thing that I can do is be grateful for what my husband did, because he cleared the basement. And if one thing got in the trash that I would have decided differently, it's for the greater good that I just say thank you so much for doing that. It looks so much better. Do I really care that little wagon is in the garbage? Do I really need to I can't. I gotta just control myself and recognize that this is the piece of the dysfunction that I grew up with, is the idea of like double checking everybody, and like the wagon and the garbage can is not the problem. The problem had been all the piled up stuff in the basement, and my husband solved that problem. Like, that's the main thing.
Something I do with myself if I come across something like that is say, if I hadn't come across this right now, would I ever have thought of this item again? And it's really useful because, like, oh, this is a nice birthday card from my grandma. That's nice and nostalgic. But if I hadn't found it while sorting through a pile, would I have lain in bed at night going, I need to find that birthday card from grandma? I would, and it really helps to put things in perspective a bit. There are some things that I do lay in bed at night and think, I wish I could find that thing. And when I do find that thing, I will keep it. But everything else, most of it, I wouldn't have thought of it again.
Yeah.
And finally, there will be people listening to this who are hoarders who have children. What would you want them to know from your point of view?
I think the most heartbreaking glimpses I've seen into the experience of like a parent who has children, a parent who's struggling with this issue. And it's been years since I saw this, but I remember seeing a parent talk about their fear of having their children taken away and training their children to not talk to anyone. And, that level of paranoia that their children should not feel like they can access any support from any other adult. And I thought, like, that is the worst, like the absolute worst. And I can't relate to the somebody who fears their children being taken away because of the unsafe environment. I love my own children, and so I understand like how hard that would be. But I think it's really if you are someone who is struggling with compulsive hoarding and you have children and you really want to be supportive of them, if you are aware enough to be concerned about that, I think that one of the most important things you can do is promote like relationships with other adults outside of your house, other places that they can be to see like a functional household running, and like to even be able to complain to somebody who maybe is a trusted friend. My mother didn't realize during my childhood, I don't think she realized how supportive it was for me, but she had an older sister, my aunt, who I would see every summer. And my aunt and I would stay up till 2 or 3 in the morning, and I would sort of talk about various problems with my mother. And my aunt would just say, just between you and me, your mom is messed up. And she loved my mother. It wasn't that she was trying to turn me against my mother or make conflicts worse with my mother. I needed that. That helped a lot. And I think as a parent, these are conversations that are awkward to have. I mean, I make mistakes with my children all the time, and some of them I own up to, some of them I probably didn't when they were 8 or 10. Children who are growing up in an environment like this, like the more outlets they have outside of their home, the better, really.
Yeah, that's really important. That's really important. Is there anything we haven't covered that you think is important to mention?
Well, I guess we touched on it earlier, but I think one of the challenges with dealing with this disorder, I mean, from your own insights into how difficult it is to cope with when you realize there's something wrong, and like just how hard it is for us particularly as adult children, when people see our parents struggling and our parents are older, or they might have physical challenges that make it that much harder for them to function in this environment. Like, I think it's important for people to understand how little influence children might have. And it's a horrible situation to be in for many of us, because we participated in all the hiding, right? For many of us, we were the public face of the family. We might come out of the house and look really functional, and our the whole plan is to like, see, everything's normal. Oh yeah, I'll wait on the front porch for you. No, don't come in. No, we're all good. We're all good. By the time we're in crisis, there are probably a whole lot of people in the community who have only known us as extremely functional. And so their expectation is that, well, of course you're just going to go home and like fix things and help your mother, right? And it's not that. It's an unreasonable burden to foist on us for a whole host of reasons. But I think it's important for people to understand just how much social pressure is on us to pretend that it's a functional situation where we could jump in and help. And we might want to help and realize we can't. Or we might help and make them really mad. I once tried to help and my mother called the police on me. It's so hard.
Wow. That's heavy. That's heavy. And yeah, I have to be aware when I look around me that this is all my responsibility. My hoard I made it and I need to unmake it. And living on my own makes that as clear as possible. But I would imagine, growing up when somebody else is imposing this is a really confusing mindset to be in. And nobody could fix it for me. Somebody, I'm sure, could come in and clear it all out, but that's not the same thing at all. I know I've seen arguments and discussions about should we just force a clear out somehow. She's gone into hospital for a week, let's empty the house, that kind of thing. And I can absolutely see the temptation. But I think in most cases that's massively counterproductive. But I can also see that if you are the child of that person, people would look to you and say, why haven't you fixed this? When that's completely unreasonable and unrealistic.
Yeah, and I know that in my situation, we tried to split the difference. So we had my father was vulnerable, and we knew, that it had to be made safe for him. We also knew that it was wildly disrespectful and not the right path to just clear the whole house out. And so we were trying to meet in the middle. We tried to be as careful as we could about we're tackling this because we don't think that this will bother her at all. All of these things are current. They look like trash to us, but we're putting them all in storage. They're going on the shelves downstairs so she can, we think they're throwaway, but we're putting them away. We're storing, we were trying to meet both sides of the problem, both my father's needs and my mother's challenges, obviously. And there's never a good path. I don't know that there's ever a good path. I mean, there was just so much anger and there was no helping her understand the efforts that we had made to be sensitive and the needs of my father, that when you're juggling these different needs. And I have to say, if my father had not been part of the equation, I don't think that I would have been motivated to intervene. And, that's another piece of it, right? How do people find out your parent is living that way and you chose not to intervene?
Yeah, I would say I, with all the knowledge and insight I have, I would say it is absolutely your right not to intervene. But if somebody only has a very basic understanding of the situation, they might think, well, if my mum's house was messy, I'd help her tidy it up, as if that was the only issue.
Mm-hmm.
It's so tricky. So tricky. Well, thank you so much for talking to me. I'm going to put some links to useful information in the show notes. Been really valuable to talk to you. Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for being interested.
In just 1 second, I'll give you my top tip of the week. In the meantime, please do subscribe to the podcast, review it, 5 stars would be amazing, and share it with your friends or anyone who might be interested or who might benefit from it. It all really helps. To find out more ways to support the website, the podcast, and my overall de-hoarding project, go to overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/support. Now, back to your top tip. So my top tip this week is a quick one. Use music to get you in the mood. Maybe you normally try and declutter to an audiobook or a podcast, but sometimes if you need a bit of extra energy, get some lively music on. Do a search on, if you use Spotify, search the playlists, name things like housework songs or songs to get ready for a night out or anything like that that's going to be peppy and energizing, and it might just help you to get moving. Thank you for listening, and I'll speak to you next week. Thank you for listening to the Overcome Compulsive Hoarding podcast. You can find more online at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk. You can find me on Twitter at @Hoarder and on Facebook at Overcome Compulsive Hoarding with @Hoarder. To find out more about how you can support this podcast and the overall project, go to overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/support and do subscribe to this podcast so you make sure you don't miss any future episodes.
Spring? Is that you? Warmer temps mean new Allbirds styles. Meet the Superlight Collection, the lightest ever shoes from Allbirds, now in fresh colors. These must-have travel shoes have a lighter-than-air feel and a barely-there fit that made them the most packable shoes ever. Plus, they're comfy right out of the box. That means more comfort and less baggage. Experience how Allbirds is redefining comfort. Visit allbirds.com and use code SUPER24 for a free pair of socks with a purchase of $48 or more. That's ALLBIRDS.com, code SUPER24.